So this is an introduction to totality therapy. So the concept of totality therapy is a concept that I developed once sitting with my teacher, Rahasia. We were playing around with just the texture of our work as tantrikas, as tantra teachers. And I said to him, you know, it feels to me like what I'm teaching is a kind of therapy, but it's totality therapy. And it's the therapy of how to be completely embodied in all aspects of your life. How to be totally present in every sensation, in every experience, on every level. Emotionally, sexually, physically, mentally, and not to avoid any experience. So when I use the term totality, that is what I mean. I mean being completely 100% present with everything, which of course is our goal as seekers. We want to wake up to the truth of who we are. We want to wake up. We want to live in unconditional love. But there are some things that are in the way. We don't just decide we want to wake up and then it just miraculously happens. Because our capacity to be fully embodied and present now is limited by what is in our unconscious. So this is the concept I want to introduce now. The unconscious. Candace Pert says the body is the unconscious. What she means by that is she's a microbiologist, neurobiologist. What she means by that is that every experience that we've ever had that we didn't fully allow ourselves to experience, every time we've had an experience where there's been any emotions or any sensations that we haven't allowed ourselves fully to have, all of what has been suppressed goes into the unconscious, and the memory of that gets stored in our cells, in our body. And so from our cellular memory, our ability to be present in the world gets limited basically through filters of perception. Filters in our ability to perceive what is real. So one clear example of how that works is if you think about your relationship to relationships. So think about relationships that you've had. If you ever notice yourself having patterns where you repeat the same kind of thing. The kind of thing that you told yourself, I am never going to do that again. And guess what? You find yourself doing it again. So a very sweet example of that I have is a client who came to me. Beautiful woman, she looks like she's 15. She's 35. But she is exhausted by life. And she tells me that she has this pattern in her life which is making her totally depressed. What happens is she meets a man and everything is beautiful until the man says to her, you know, I really would like it if you dress like a little girl for me. And then she gets very excited about the idea of dressing like a little girl. So she dresses up as a little girl and he gets very excited and it's hot. Until one day, she realizes what she's doing. And she starts going, you pervert! Me pervert! And she's out of there. And then after about 3 months of relationship, she'll have 3 years of celibacy and hating men and wanting them to just stay away. And then the next man will come along and she'll fall in love. And one day he'll say to her, you know, I'd really love it if you dress up like a little girl for me. So you can see how the story goes. It's quite a kind of almost a extreme example of the patterns that we find ourselves repeating in life. And in our relationships is an area where we see that clearly, but also in other areas. So why do we repeat those patterns? We repeat the patterns because our ability to be present is filtered through unconscious webs. I like to think of it as being like webs that run over our perception. If you imagine like veils that run in front of your eyes. And so those veils are veils that come from experiences in our being that are unresolved, because we weren't able to fully take in the experience at the time. So So an example that most of us have is an experience of being rejected. So at some point during our childhood, for most of us, we got some message of not being accepted. It could be the first time we didn't get mother's milk. It could be before we were even born, the sense that we weren't really welcome, we weren't expected in the world. It could be a misunderstanding. It could be the first time your mother scolded you. My colleague Stephen in South Africa recently had a very big connection to a time when he was about 4 years old and his mother got really, really angry at him. And he felt into the depth of rejection that he felt. And how fundamental it got into the fiber of his being. Because he was so little and he couldn't understand what was going on. So for his being, it felt like, being cut off from the source. And so we've all had experiences like that where our connection to the source has been limited through experiences that have basically put us into shock, into some degree of freeze. I can't deal with this. And so one of my teachers talks about the frozen child. So there's that place where the child is frozen because of something that happened. And there are different layers of this. We all have our different ways of relating to rejection, abandonment, betrayal. The states that we would like to at all costs avoid. That we shape our relationships around so that we won't feel rejection, abandonment, betrayal. Loss of love. And yet our very efforts at avoiding those states is what keeps us trapped. So the essence of totality therapy is to create an environment and a context within which it becomes possible for you and in which you're encouraged to feel it all. Because through the feeling of it all, you get liberated. Whatever's been trapped and held in the unconscious, when it gets given an opportunity to be felt and to be fully experienced, it reintegrates in your being. And it no longer, the filter drops, that particular veil drops. And the energy gets reclaimed as part of the juice of your life, instead of being held in tightness somewhere down, held down somewhere. Of course, another level of what is in the unconscious is the collective unconscious. This is really big for all of us. Our ancestry. Our ancestors have had such a journey around what they have suppressed, what they have not allowed themselves to feel, what they have seen as taboo. And then we have that ourselves too. We've got our own taboos that come from the rules with which we've grown up with, the tribal understandings of what is good and what's evil, what's acceptable and what's not. So we grow up with a lot of taboos, and most of us, we're all liberated beings. We're sitting in this room ready to do whatever it's going to take. And yet, underneath it all, there are still these deep, deep, deep beliefs that have come into us through our mother's milk. And so that is part of what forms our unconscious and part of what we want to work with this weekend. I'm going to attempt to introduce you to all 7 aspects of totality therapy this weekend. And we're going to begin with, I call it basically riding the wave of totality therapy, because it's like a wave. So the first part of it's the lift-off. It's the catalyzing. Because the thing is that what is in our unconscious wants to stay unconscious, right? It would rather stay there because it's comfortable, not to stir the pot. So we have to find ways to encourage the unconscious to reveal itself and to be felt in the body and in the emotional body. And so the 2 methods which we're going to be working with today that take us there are also the first 2 themes in totality therapy. The first one is embracing your fantasies and your desires. So we're talking erotic fantasies here and erotic desires. So why do we work with eroticism in this work? Because, as Plato said, eros leads to gnosis. So eros is our eroticism. Gnosis is higher truth or understanding. And what basically happens is that this body, which is the unconscious, is actually there to help us to wake up. And the body's got this really fabulous mechanism to help remind us of what is suppressed and unconscious. It is called our erotic response. Right? So if we pay attention to our erotic response and we explore that response consciously, that is going to help us to integrate the gnosis, the deeper wisdom, which we don't yet have access to. So when we do that, when we open to our desire, especially that desire which is being suppressed or not being acknowledged, what it does is that it releases huge amounts of energy. It also initiates the fire of our being. So we do need to light the fire in order to start this energy moving up through the body. If we just keep that fire unignited, then we can sit on top of the mountain and be in deep blissful meditation, and yet that fire is not being lit. And we do need to light the fire. If we want to wake up, we need that energy of the fire. And then another really interesting thing about embracing our fears and our fantasies and desires is that in order for you to really, even as we shortly going to be doing, to even articulate what your erotic fantasies are, you are going to need to be willing to challenge your existing understanding of who you are. Right. In the shamanic world, that's called shape-shifting. It means becoming slightly unattached to what you think you look like. Because what you look like in a short while might be very different from what you're looking like now. So for instance, if you see yourself as being a very spiritual person and a meditator, and you find yourself having this fantasy which is about becoming a wild devouring animal who just wants to fuck virgins, that might be a shock to your ego. And that is one of the reasons why I'm going to be doing this work with you. Because exactly that shift is what is necessary to help you to move out of identification with who you think you are. So I'll tell a little story here. What I'm called in the Tantra tradition is a dakini. So a dakini is a woman who carries the tradition of Tantra, and she was in the ancient times was a secret. She lived up in the mountain. Nobody knew about her. You had to really be ready to find out about her. However, what would happen is that if the teacher found you to be ready, as you've now been sitting in deep meditation at the top of the mountain for 20, 30 years and in complete dedication to your practice and commitment, and he finds that you're ready now, he is going to send the dakini to you. So you've been celibate for the last 20, 30 years and following a very strict diet and rules of conduct, spiritual conduct. Now comes the dakini and she seduces you, right? She seduces you to have sex with her. So now imagine after 30 years of celibacy, to have this wild woman come and just before you know it, you are having intercourse. Imagine what that could do to a person's ego. Imagine the possibility of that beautifully crafted spiritual ego, which has been such a vessel for awakening, the opportunity for that last vessel to be shattered instantly in that moment as the intercourse happens. Because it's so incongruent with who I thought I am. And then if that's not enough, she'll take him down to the graveyard, which is an unholy place. She'll get him to eat meat, which is unholy food. Get him to drink alcohol, which is absolutely not allowed for the sadhu. And then she's going to start teaching him the sexual practices, because the building of that heat is very likely to take him to his awakening. And so that is the process of embracing our fantasies and our desires. And then the second aspect of what we're working with today is the opposite of that. Fantasy and desire. And then the opposite is our fears, lifting our taboos and suppressions. So that which keeps us from stepping into our desires is our taboos and that which we've suppressed, that which we haven't allowed ourselves to feel, those places we haven't allowed ourselves to go. So in order to enter into that realm, we need to be willing, in a sense, to transgress our own sexual boundaries. And we are going to be doing that in a very subtle way. So it doesn't necessarily require of you to step into big, overt actions. It's about the way in which you hold your perception of what's taboo. And we're going to be working into that zone. Of course, when you step into that zone, as soon as you look at what you've suppressed and what is seen as taboo, it's like this. You're seeing a tiger come from that side, right? And it's getting bigger, and you're running that way. You're running away from the tiger. And it's just getting bigger and bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn around and face the tiger and sit with it. Because when you enter into the realm of desire, of your deepest erotic desire, it will face you with your deepest fears. And I think you sense that already. So this is the way that it works. We go into desire, and immediately it takes us directly into the opposite of what our deepest fears are. And an example of that is a couple that I worked with who, the man had a fantasy of seeing his wife with another man, and the woman had a fantasy of seeing her husband with another woman. And so an opportunity presented at a workshop where his wife sent the whole group of women to descend on the man. And he was overwhelmed with all these women bodies all over his body kissing him. And what happened was that he had a huge shock and he started wailing. And that went on for a couple of hours and actually for the next week. And during the week he sent us messages saying that he is having the most extraordinary unraveling of his childhood, of the memories of not feeling loved by his mother. And just that overwhelm of being met by the feminine like that opened up his biggest fear that he didn't want to go to. He didn't want to feel that deep fear of being rejected by the feminine. So here he gets overwhelmingly accepted by the feminine, and it brings up that fear that he's been holding down and wanting not to feel. Right, so then we get to the next category of the work. We've talked about the lift off now. Now, what do we do once we've now catalyzed, opened Pandora's box, catalyzed all the stuff? Because it can get intense. There's a good reason why all these things stay in the unconscious. The reason is that we don't want them to be conscious. It's too much. It's too much. We can't cope with that amount of experience. So if you think of really deeply facing your fear of rejection and sitting in the fire of that, it's a lot. So the path of totality therapy is about increasing your capacity to be in every experience to the utmost level of where that can take you. Another way of saying that is increasing your capacity for sensation, right? Because emotion ultimately is also sensation. If you think of what happens in your body when you have an emotion, if you feel grief or you feel anger, there's a sensation response in your body. And so what we're doing here is we're increasing our capacity for sensation. Because if you want to be able to love unconditionally, you are going to have a very big capacity for sensation. If you want to wake up, you are going to have a very big capacity for sensation. Your nervous system is going to have to be able to cope with the level of energy that's going to be running through your being.
Did you name the third method?
The third method. I haven't started yet. I'm just talking now about introducing the processes of how we then cope with what comes up. Because we're going to be opening the box that's going to bring up a whole lot of stuff, and then what to do. And so tomorrow we'll be working with most of these. Today I'm going to introduce you to the first one of the three techniques we'll work with. And that is, the theme is expanding your heart capacity. So in opening to fear and desire, there is going to be a lot happening in our hearts. And you might be feeling that already. So I'm going to be introducing you to ways of expanding your capacity to keep your heart open. So the reason why we feel pain in our hearts is because the heart shuts down. When the heart shuts down, it's because we're experiencing something that we don't want to experience. So the path towards waking up the heart is developing the capacity to keep your heart open at all times. So the two themes that we'll work with tomorrow, the one is integrating polarities, and the second one is masculine-feminine integration. So integrating polarities. Desire and fear is an example of a polarity. All of our existence tends to be structured around polarized experiences. Right and wrong, good and evil, acceptable, unacceptable. And if you look in your own life, as we will be doing over this weekend, you will find that there are particular polarities that are very pertinent to who you see yourself to be. They tend to run unconsciously. And we want to find them because in processing those polarities and then integrating them, we are doing a huge amount of work in terms of expanding our ego structures. What we're here to do is not to kill our egos. We are here to expand our egos so that they can become infinite. Right? We don't want them to be limited. We don't want our perception of who we are to be limited in any way. We want it to keep on expanding. And so whatever is in the way of us seeing ourselves as one with everything, that the polarities, the limited perceptions of self, those things need to be processed and integrated. So that we'll work with tomorrow. Then the next level of the work is working with masculine and feminine integration. And so very key to our sexuality and to our being is this reality that I am in a female body, you're in a male body. And so for me, to really get access to the masculine aspect of myself, you are my mirrors. Yeah, the men in my life are the ones who help me to get in touch with the masculine because my body is not masculine. And so what we tend to do in our living is we tend to believe that the soulmate, the beloved, is somewhere out there. Some great mystical journey. If we just are good enough, or we just get clever enough, or we do enough relationship counseling, we will find the beloved out there. And then we're going to be happy forever after. Mm-hmm. And that's a beautiful story. And so it goes a bit deeper. The reality is there is a soulmate. But the soulmate is within. The journey towards wholeness is a journey of integrating your inner masculine, your inner feminine. It's the journey towards the deep love affair in the self. But in order to get there, we need the other. Because I am in a woman's body, I need those beloveds around me, the men, the fathers, the brothers, the lovers, who hold for me aspects of my inner masculine that I cannot see and that I haven't fully reclaimed. So we'll be working on that journey of how to start becoming conscious and aware of your inner relationship and to start having that love affair consciously and deeply as a reality, not just as a concept, but as a lived experience. And then, when that is happening, gee, does that serve your outer relationships? Because there's a fullness there already. There's a deep completion inside your being, and so now you can love the beloved out of the fullness of your being, not out of a sense of neediness or incompleteness or somehow needing to get what you can't find in yourself. Right. So then, once we've done that processing, we can get to the crest of the whole exercise, which is about deepening our capacity for bliss. So now we've lifted off, we've gotten into the uncomfortable stuff, we've opened up Pandora's box, we've processed, we've found ways of integrating all this material, of being with it. And what does that do? It deepens our capacity for sensation, and in doing so, it deepens our capacity for bliss. what my understanding of bliss is, that bliss is the balance that happens when we accept both our shadow and our light, and we come to rest in love. So it's a non-dual state. It's a state that embraces both the shadow and the light in our experience. It's a state that embraces our fury, our rage, our grief, our depression. It's a state that embraces our ecstasy, our juice, our desire, our enjoyment. Your capacity for bliss is limited by your capacity to feel everything else. This is a secret which most people don't realize. You do not only develop your capacity by bliss by focusing on everything that's nice. If you focus only on everything that's nice, your capacity for bliss will be 50% of what's possible. Because the other 50% of experience and the energy in that you have just excluded from what could be blissful. So imagine being in the depths of grief and feeling the blissfulness of that. Feeling the deep, juicy exquisiteness of being fully present in your grief while the grief is happening. So that is where we're moving towards, in being completely present in our bodies. We're going to be working with a few things. We're going to be working with breath awareness, how to start becoming aware of this deep, delicious embrace of the and caress of the breath entering into the body and out and through the body. We're going to be working with sensory awareness, really starting to feel and sense this world. We're going to work with nervous system repatterning. So this has got to do with the flow between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system. And I want to just explain a bit here. I've spoken to you about the frozen child. When something in us freezes, when something has a shock, what happens is that our nervous system goes into contraction. The sympathetic nervous system goes and goes into a holding. And so all of you can probably recognize somewhere in your life areas where you're holding tension. That's because somewhere the sympathetic nervous system has gotten stuck in a holding. And so part of the work is repatterning the nervous system so that the natural loop between the parasympathetic release mechanism, release and relaxation mechanism, and the sympathetic activation contraction mechanism, that the loop between those two can naturally happen. And I want to just say a little bit more about that now, because it might start happening like really soon, that this kind of process is happening. So the example that Peter Levine uses to describe this work is to say, if a buck gets caught by a lion, what will happen is the buck is going to freeze. It's going to freeze, its body is going to go cold, all the energy is going to go to the central organs in order for it to stay alive as long as possible. If the buck is lucky and the lion gets distracted, the buck will stay frozen for a moment longer still, and then it's going to start shaking from the little tail up. Involuntary shaking out the legs, shaking out the ears. Everything's going to shake out its paws. Take a breath and walk off like nothing ever happened. Animals do not have any trauma memories in their bodies. They do not hold trauma memories. Because in an animal, the natural flow of the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system just does the work of releasing the trauma, of allowing the contraction, and allowing the holding of the energy, and then allowing the release and the contraction, the release and the shaking to happen. And so what we want to do is to encourage our nervous system to start letting that loop happen. So some of what we'll be doing this weekend is going to be taking you into high anxiety potentially states. Guess why I'm doing that? Because I have discovered, I'm not the only person who's discovered this, is that one of the ways of helping the nervous system to repattern is meeting the contraction where it is in the body and allowing it to be felt. right? So there's a contraction somewhere, there's a fear of something. I don't want to go there because that's just so weird. I can't even think about it. And then I'm so excited about it too. So my nervous system is, my blood is starting to pump, and I'm so excited and don't know what to do with myself because this is so evil, and how could I even think about it? And so all of that happening is the sympathetic nervous system getting really activated. And I'm going to encourage you to allow the fullness of that experience, because when the sympathetic nervous system goes into its full contraction, instead of doing what we usually do, which is stop it, you know, you think of what we do with children when they start crying or when they have a reaction to something, we tell them to just behave themselves or be quiet. So we've learned not to allow the full contraction. And as healers, we don't do that either. You know, we see somebody going into anxiety and we try and calm them down. And sometimes what they need is to go into the anxiety and to be facilitated into that. And then, naturally what will happen is the parasympathetic nervous system takes over. Emotions start to flood. The heat starts flooding through the body. Things start releasing. And of its own accord, the body starts throwing off the tensions that were held. And then there's no more memory left in the body of that. The quality of deep presence in our lovemaking is also what we are going to be working with on Sunday as part of presence in the body. So for most of the world, our sexual life has looked like this. I have to just tell the story again because it's illustrated. Boy gets erection. Erection is nice, but it's a problem because people are going to see I've got an erection. So I close the door and I pull out the porn magazines and masturbate really fast before my mother knocks on the door, right? And come before she discovers me. And I do that a few times a day, and I do that for the next 5 years before I meet my first girlfriend, who hasn't been masturbating, because good girls don't do that. And then what happens is that good girl has now heard that this is the thing to do, is to have sex. You know, she's heard this from all her other friends, and she's not sure what she's supposed to do, but you know, she's sure the man is going to know. And the man is very sure he knows what to do because he knows where his penis wants to go. And so what happens is that there is a very quick experience of intercourse that ensues before the man ejaculates. And the woman finds herself slightly puzzled by this experience because she didn't enjoy it at all. She thought this was going to be enjoyable, but it wasn't, because she's only just begun warming up and he's now already ejaculated. And so she develops the idea that probably what sex is about for women is about getting the affirmation of men. Finding acceptance, being loved, being appreciated. And so she starts gearing her sexuality towards emotional gratification. What she can get emotionally from men. This is a completely generalized, stereotyped story that I'm telling. Okay, but it does illustrate a few points. One of the points that it illustrates is that for many of us, because we've grown up in sexually repressed societies, we've not had the opportunity to really explore our bodies as children, as adolescents, as young people. And our first sexual experiences were very rushed and were pressurized, and we didn't really get the chance to encounter the fullness of lovemaking. And so our experience of sex becomes something that's very compressed into the genitals. And that the best that we can experience from lovemaking is this contraction into the genitals, and then this great 45 seconds explosion. And then that's it. And then we can sleep. And so this, of course, is not the full capacity of what we can experience as sexual beings. The other aspect of what that story illustrates is that for many of us, there is a lot of association involved in sex. So for instance, the girl's association is, if I make love to the man and he has an ejaculation, he is going to be very happy with me and he's going to love me. So what I have to do is make sure, first of all, that he has an erection, and secondly, that he ejaculates. Because that's going to mean that he's happy and that he loves me. And so then I find myself working with a whole lot of beautiful tantric men who would love to make love for longer to women, but the women just want them to have an erection and to ejaculate as soon as possible, because their story goes that if he doesn't ejaculate, he doesn't love me. And I'm not being a good lover. So we have all of those stories building up. So we want to unwind all of that so that we can get to a place where there is just the pure presence of this body, this being, meeting this other body, and we can just deeply enter into the fullness of sexual energy, sexual encounter, and allow that energy to flood up the whole body and fill every cell in our beings, which is what it naturally wants to do if we just get out of the way. So that is the summary of what we'll be doing over this weekend and what totality therapy is about.